American engineers laughed when they first saw what the Vietnamese called a bridge. It wasn't made of steel or concrete. It was bamboo, rope, and mud. To them, it looked like something that would collapse under its own weight. So they bombed it, again and again, confident that no army could rebuild such fragile structures fast enough to matter. But then, something impossible happened. Every morning, reconnaissance pilots looked down and saw the same river crossing restored, rebuilt in a single night, as if the jungle itself had healed the wounds left by their bombs. The U.S. Air Force called it a miracle. The engineers called it madness. But to the North Vietnamese, it was just another night's work. To understand how it happened, we have to go back to the early days of the Vietnam War. By the mid-1960s, the Vietnam War had become a battle not only of soldiers and weapons, but of endurance and ingenuity. The United States, confident in its overwhelming air power and industrial might, believed it could cripple North Vietnam's ability to fight by destroying its supply routes. The strategy was simple on paper: cut the arteries that fed the war. Every bridge, every road, every rail line became a target. Operation Rolling Thunder unleashed wave after wave of bombs upon the narrow land that stretched from Hanoi to the southern front. In theory, the destruction of bridges would paralyze movement, isolate troops, and starve the battlefield of ammunition and food. The U.S. Air Force estimated that each bombed bridge would take weeks, if not months, to rebuild. For American engineers, the math was clear: no logistics, no war. But what they didn't understand was that Vietnam was not a country that waited. Beneath the green canopy of the jungle, a different kind of engineering force was at work, one not measured in machinery or concrete, but in human hands, bamboo, and resolve. The Vietnamese People's Army had developed a system that turned impossibility into routine. Their philosophy was brutally simple: if it was destroyed by night, it must stand again by morning. To them, the bridge was not a structure, it was a lifeline. Each crossing connected hidden supply depots, medical stations, and forward units along the legendary Ho Chi Minh Trail, a vast network of dirt paths, rivers, and makeshift routes stretching from the north deep into the south. American strategists saw the trail as a vulnerable target. To the Vietnamese, it was a living organism that could adapt faster than any bomb could destroy it. In the deltas and jungles, teams of young engineers, often barely out of their teens, worked with nothing but ropes, saws, and sheer determination. They learned to construct lightweight bridges that could be assembled silently under moonlight using local materials that blended perfectly into the terrain. These makeshift structures could hold trucks, tanks, and entire convoys. And yet, when daylight came, they could be dismantled and hidden beneath the water or foliage in a matter of minutes. The Americans, with their satellites and reconnaissance planes, watched in disbelief as bridges they had obliterated the previous evening seemed to reappear by dawn. Reports from pilots were often dismissed as errors, but soon the evidence became impossible to ignore. The North Vietnamese were rebuilding faster than the bombs could fall. By 1967, entire engineering battalions had been formed solely for this purpose: to repair and rebuild under fire. They became known as the night workers, operating in darkness, guided by nothing but flashlights and instinct. Their rhythm of life was dictated by explosions. When the bombs stopped, they began. While American commanders calculated progress in tonnage of explosives dropped, Vietnamese engineers calculated success in hours of restored traffic flow. For every bridge destroyed, a new one appeared, sometimes not in the same place, but close enough to keep supplies moving. Flexibility became their weapon and invisibility their armor. It was this unseen war of infrastructure not fought with rifles but with ropes and sweat that would soon humiliate the most technologically advanced military in the world. To understand how the impossible became routine, we must follow the men and women who built these ghost bridges night after night under the thunder of American bombers. The Americans called it logistical sorcery. The North Vietnamese called it necessity. When U.S. bombers shattered bridges across the Red River, the Perfume River, and countless jungle tributaries, the Vietnamese engineers did not mourn, they adapted. To them, destruction was just another stage in the process of rebuilding. The backbone of this miracle was the Cong Binh, the combat engineers of North Vietnam. Most were in their late teens or early 20s. Farmers, students, mechanics suddenly turned into master builders under fire. They were trained not in classrooms but in the mud, learning to calculate weight loads and river currents by instinct. Their textbooks were burned bamboo and collapsed structures. Their teachers were the scars left by previous bombings. Each team had one mission: keep the supply lines alive. They worked without machinery, relying on primitive tools, axes, hammers, ropes, and whatever could be carried on a bicycle. Yet their efficiency stunned even their own commanders. Within hours of an air raid, the engineers were already in motion, moving in small, silent groups along the riverbanks. At night, the jungle would come alive, lanterns dimmed with rags, whispers in the dark, the sound of bamboo poles striking water. The engineers built pontoon bridges from oil drums and wooden planks, or floating platforms using truck tires and barrels salvaged from wreckage. The most ingenious structures were the invisible bridges, thin, flexible spans that sat just beneath the water's surface. To a pilot flying above, the river looked empty, but to a convoy crossing at night, it was a lifeline. They learned to adapt to every kind of river. In shallow streams, they drove stakes into the mud to anchor platforms. In deep, fast-flowing waters, they used long bamboo bundles tied together with vines to form buoyant, flexible surfaces. Even if part of the structure was destroyed, the rest could shift and reform. Every technique had one purpose: speed. American bombs could obliterate a steel bridge in seconds. The Vietnamese could rebuild a wooden one before dawn. Some bridges were temporary, meant to last a single night, just long enough for a convoy of trucks to pass before being dismantled at sunrise. Others were masterpieces of camouflage, covered in foliage so thick they looked like part of the riverbank. It wasn't just engineering, it was performance art under fire. One American pilot later recalled, "We hit that bridge 4 times in a week. Every morning it was back. It was like fighting ghosts." Another U.S. officer described the phenomenon bitterly. "They built them faster than we could destroy them. It was like trying to drain the ocean with a bucket." Behind each miracle stood human endurance. Many engineers worked barefoot, their clothes soaked and caked in mud. Bomb fragments often tore through their work sites, yet they kept building. If someone was injured, others would drag him aside and continue hammering, their faces lit by the flicker of burning wreckage. They built under the roar of American jets, timing their movements with the distant thunder of explosions to mask the sound of hammering. Some teams even used the enemy's bomb craters to their advantage, diverting rivers or hiding materials in the holes left by B-52 strikes. The Vietnamese also developed an intricate system of decoys. Fake bridges built entirely from straw and bamboo frames were placed near real sites to lure American bombs. Pilots, seeing the glint of light or shadow on the water, would release their payloads, obliterating nothing but empty air. Meanwhile, a real bridge, hidden a few hundred meters away, remained untouched. By 1968, these techniques had evolved into an art form. The Cong Binh were no longer just builders, they were magicians of war. They could construct a crossing that would hold a Soviet-made truck one night and vanish before sunrise, leaving no trace for American reconnaissance. Even the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, a force renowned for its own logistical might, began studying captured Vietnamese blueprints in disbelief. They found no heavy machinery, no prefabricated materials, no concrete mixers. Everything was done by hand, often with bamboo, palm trunks, and salvaged scrap metal. Yet the results were astonishingly effective. The Vietnamese called these living bridges because they changed shape constantly, built in one place, destroyed the next, and reborn somewhere else. The rhythm of the war became cyclical: destruction by day, resurrection by night.
Their success wasn't just technical, it was psychological. Every time the Americans bombed a bridge, they expected progress. Every time that bridge reappeared, morale sank a little lower. The message was clear. The enemy could not be stopped by force alone. As the war dragged on, even American soldiers began to respect the invisible enemy they couldn't outthink. Reports from captured intelligence officers revealed an unsettling truth. The North Vietnamese engineers were planning, predicting, and adapting faster than U.S. intelligence could react. The more bombs America dropped, the smarter these builders became. Each new explosion taught them something new about materials, about timing, about how to use nature itself as protection. Mud, water, wind, and darkness became their allies. For every bomb that fell, a new solution rose from the jungle. And by 1970, the Vietnamese had turned the art of overnight bridge building into one of the most effective survival strategies of the entire war. A silent, tireless defiance against a superpower that believed technology alone could win.
The night sky above Vietnam was never truly dark. It flickered with orange streaks of tracer fire, glowing clouds from distant explosions, and the haunting illumination of flares drifting slowly toward the ground. In that eerie light, along the banks of a nameless river, somewhere on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a group of young engineers began their nightly ritual. Their boots sank into the wet earth as they moved in silence. The air smelled of fuel and rain. Bamboo poles were carried on shoulders, ropes coiled like snakes around their necks. A single whisper cut through the night. "Work fast. They'll be back by dawn." They had rebuilt this same bridge 3 times in the past week. Every morning, American bombers erased their work. Every evening, they started again. The first hammer struck. The echo vanished into the jungle's heavy breath. Then came another, soft, rhythmic, determined. They moved like a single organism, each man knowing his task. One tied knots, another aligned the beams. A third tested the tension of the ropes with his hands. Above them, far away, but growing closer, came the distant roar of jet engines. At 2:47 a.m., the first bombs fell. The river erupted in fire. The men dove into the mud, shielding their heads. For a moment, the world disappeared into white light and thunder. When it was over, only broken fragments of wood floated downstream. But by 3:30, they were back on their feet. The leader, his face streaked with mud and blood, shouted through the smoke, "Again!" And they did. With what little remained, they rebuilt. To the Americans flying above, it was madness. "We hit that bridge 7 times, one pilot later wrote. "Every morning, reconnaissance showed it was back. We thought maybe they were using decoys, but no, trucks were crossing. Real trucks." From the cockpit of his F-105 Thunder Chief, Captain John Hollister had a clear view of the target. The river below was a scar of flame, the bridge obliterated, or so he thought. "We watched the footage later," he recalled. "You could actually see men running into the fire with ropes. They didn't even wait for the flames to die. That's when I realized we weren't fighting an army. We were fighting a will." Down below, the will of those men burned brighter than the napalm. They worked chest-deep in the river, guiding logs into place, using the water to cool the fresh-cut bamboo. Women from nearby villages joined them, carrying supplies on bicycles, their silhouettes flickering under the flares. Every explosion above sent ripples through the water, but the bridge kept taking shape, piece by piece, like a ghost materializing out of the darkness. The Americans sent everything they had, bombs, missiles, even anti-personnel mines to scatter along the banks. But each time the dust cleared, someone remained, hammering, tying, lifting. The bridges didn't just stand, they endured. In one infamous strike near Thang Hoa, U.S. F-105s attacked a narrow wooden bridge that intelligence labeled critical. For 3 hours, wave after wave of aircraft dropped thousands of pounds of ordnance. When the smoke cleared, not a single beam remained standing. Commanders marked it as neutralized. 12 hours later, the bridge was back.
rebuilt from bamboo and scavenged debris, strong enough to carry a convoy of trucks by nightfall. The following day, it was gone again, disassembled before dawn to avoid detection. American reconnaissance called it the Phantom Bridge. A U.S. colonel wrote bitterly in his field report, "Our bombs destroy the bridge, but not their resolve. Every strike feels like punching smoke." As the campaign intensified, so did the ingenuity of the Vietnamese. They learned to build modular sections upstream, floating them down to the site after dark. Some bridges were built on hidden pulleys, able to swing out of view underwater when aircraft approached. Others were disguised entirely beneath a carpet of vegetation. To American pilots, the rivers appeared unbroken, calm, until suddenly they realized that supply convoys were moving right beneath their eyes. One captured engineer later explained, "We never built one bridge. We built 10. One real, 9 illusions." By 1969, even the most hardened American officers began to feel the futility. The U.S. dropped over 1 million tons of bombs on the Ho Chi Minh Trail alone, yet the supplies kept flowing. Each destroyed bridge was a challenge, not a defeat. There were nights when rain fell so hard it drowned out the sound of engines. The engineers worked anyway, lightning flashing over their heads, their hands slick with mud and blood. Some would not see the sunrise. Yet before their comrades buried them, they made sure the bridge was finished. A young Vietnamese woman named Lien, barely 18, once led a team that rebuilt a crossing under constant bombardment. When an airstrike hit, she was thrown into the river. Her men thought she was dead, but minutes later she surfaced, clutching a length of rope. She tied it to a beam, shouted, "Keep working!" and disappeared again into the water. Her name became legend among the Cong Bien battalions, a symbol of the spirit that no bomb could erase. The Americans had superior planes, radar, and explosives, but the Vietnamese had time, patience, and a knowledge of the land that no technology could replicate. They used the jungle as armor, the rivers as allies. Even nature seemed to conspire with them, clouds covering the sky just long enough to hide their movements, rains washing away the traces of their labor. Every night became a duel between fire and faith. The bombs would fall, and when the echoes faded, the hammers began again. By the war's later years, the U.S. had mapped and destroyed hundreds of bridges across North Vietnam. Yet in every aerial photograph, new crossings appeared, crooked, uneven, improvised, but alive. A Pentagon analyst summed it up in frustration. "We are fighting carpenters with PhDs in resilience." The psychological toll was immense. American pilots began calling the missions endless loops. Some even refused to believe the bridges were real, assuming photo recon had made a mistake. But the convoys moving south told another story. The story of a nation that refused to be divided, even by rivers of fire. As one Vietnamese engineer later said, "We didn't have steel, but we had determination. For us, a bridge was not a structure. It was the promise that tomorrow our brothers at the front would eat." Under the starlight, surrounded by ruin, they worked. Barefoot, hungry, relentless. Every rope tied, every beam lifted was a quiet act of defiance against a superpower that thought victory could be measured in tons of explosives. And as dawn broke, the mist rose from the river to reveal what should have been impossible: another bridge, standing proud where none had existed hours before. Trucks rumbled across it, engines growling like a victory song. From the air, American pilots could only stare in disbelief. They had unleashed the fury of modern war upon a people armed with bamboo and lost the battle of will. The bridges of Vietnam were not just paths across rivers. They were monuments to endurance, built not of wood or rope, but of a strength that no bomb could destroy. By the early 1970s, the war had entered a new phase, one defined not by victories or conquests, but by exhaustion.
The American strategy of attrition had failed to crush the will of the Vietnamese. For every bridge destroyed, another took its place. For every bombing raid, another convoy crossed under the cover of night. In the Pentagon's air-conditioned rooms, the tone of reports began to change. Where once they spoke confidently of cutting supply arteries, now they spoke of an enemy with limitless adaptability. U.S. analysts, after reviewing months of reconnaissance photos, reached a chilling conclusion. It was no longer possible to permanently isolate the North from the southern battlefields. The Vietnamese had built not just bridges, but an entire philosophy of survival. Inside captured notebooks of North Vietnamese engineers, American intelligence officers found simple sketches, lines and arrows showing how to tie bamboo, how to lash oil drums together, how to measure current by the feel of water. But written beside these crude drawings were words that unsettled them most. If it falls tonight, it stands tomorrow. For the Cong Bin, the human cost was unimaginable. Thousands of young men and women died with hammers in their hands, drowned beneath collapsing planks, or consumed by the fire of napalm. Many never saw the dawn they worked toward. Yet even in their absence, others took their place. The bridges they left behind were silent memorials, not carved in stone, but written in persistence. When U.S. ground forces withdrew, many American soldiers admitted their respect for the invisible enemy they had once mocked. "They outbuilt us," one engineer from the U.S. Army Corps later said. "We had machines, they had willpower. Guess which one lasted longer?" The resilience of these night builders forced the U.S. to confront an uncomfortable truth. Technology could destroy, but it could not prevent creation. No matter how many bombs fell, they could not erase a nation's determination to stand and rebuild. Historians now look back at the Bridge War as one of the most profound lessons of Vietnam. It exposed the limits of industrial warfare against a people who used time, nature, and simplicity as their greatest weapons. Every destroyed structure became a teacher. Every repair an evolution. By the end of the war, the North Vietnamese engineers had perfected techniques of rapid construction and camouflage that would later be studied by militaries across the world. For Vietnam, those bridges were more than logistics. They were symbols of defiance, proof that ingenuity and endurance could overcome even the might of a superpower. To this day, veterans who survived the bombardments still speak of the nights spent waist-deep in mud, listening to the distant hum of American jets while tying the ropes that would hold a nation together. And for the Americans, it was a lesson written in sweat and blood, that wars are not won solely by firepower or precision. They are won by those who refuse to yield, who rebuild what is lost again and again until the impossible becomes routine. The bridges that once spanned the rivers of Vietnam have long been replaced by modern structures of steel and concrete, but their spirit remains. Each one still carries a quiet echo of the nights when entire armies tried to erase them and failed. Because in the end, the bridges were never just built from bamboo. They were built from belief.
When the last American bombs fell silent, the rivers of Vietnam still carried the reflections of bridges, some new, some rebuilt 100 times over. They stood as quiet reminders that victory is not measured in what you destroy, but in what survives you. For the U.S. engineers who once doubted, the war had rewritten the laws of warfare itself. They came to realize that no blueprint, no calculation could account for human endurance. In the jungles of Vietnam, logic had met willpower and lost. Today, those stories of midnight construction and bamboo ingenuity remain buried beneath layers of history, overshadowed by larger battles and louder headlines. But for the men and women who built through the darkness, every plank, every rope, every nail was an act of defiance, a promise that nothing, not even war, could stop a nation from moving forward. Because in the end, it wasn't the bridges that amazed the world. It was the hands that built them, faster than bombs could destroy. Next time, we follow those same hands into the shadows of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, where roads vanished by day and reappeared by night, in a war where even the jungle itself seemed alive.